Hi, this is Dylan Hedtler-Gaudette, Director of Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight and a proud member of the NFB of Maryland. You're listening to White Canes Connect.
Hey there, PA Federationists. Welcome to another episode of White Canes Connect, presented by the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania. My name is David Goldstein. I am the first Vice President of the NFB of PA. Joining me today is co-host and White Canes Connect creator, Lisa Bryant. Lisa, how are you today?
I am well, David, and I think folks will really be interested in listening to Dylan Hedtler-Gaudette, who is Director of Foreign Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight, a nonprofit watchdog that's based in D.C. Dylan recently testified about and sort of explaining what abuse is, what waste is. Unfortunately, the meat of his testimony was really not recognized as much by some people, and he was just personally attacked and dismissed simply because he's blind.
It was horrific to me when I read all those different things on X, and to show that, and I don't believe those folks are the only ones. I'm sure a lot of people think that, and that's why we are constantly battling to change people's minds and their opinions of blind people. Here's what President Riccobono had to say.
I'm here in Ocean City, Maryland for the convention of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland. And on behalf of all the members of the National Federation of the Blind, especially here in Maryland, we really want to condemn the use of stereotyping language around blindness in the political discourse of America today. We put out a statement earlier today, a statement on the harmful stereotyping of blind people in political discourse. And look, we are an advocacy organization. We believe in free speech and having the opportunity to have our opinions heard. But it's really harmful when blindness is used as a metaphor to label issues where people disagree, to label incompetence, to label in a way that really only harms blind people. We were particularly disappointed when Dylan Hedtler-Gaudette, who also happens to be a member of the National Federation of the Blind here in Maryland, he had the opportunity to testify in front of congressional committee, and many in the media and elected political leaders have now used his blindness as a reason to discredit his testimony. Look, we can have discourse, we can disagree, but blindness and the harmful stereotypes of blindness should never be used as a weapon because it only harms blind people. We're out here trying to live our lives and trying to fulfill the American values. So we're calling on elected leaders and members of the media to stop these practices and bring more civility and less harmful language of disability into the political discourse in this nation.
So if you didn't see that, I'll put a link in the show notes to get you to part of Dylan's testimony and a couple of news articles that came out because of everything that went down. So check that out. And Lisa, again, it's just always an uphill battle for us. It doesn't matter. In this case, it didn't matter what he said. It was some people didn't like it. And they, instead of attacking what he said, they attacked on, here's a blind guy that says he can't see any problems. That's the trouble that we are constantly facing.
But what's encouraging is that Dylan remains focused. So without further ado, let's listen to Dylan, who, by the way, is also a proud member of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland.
Dylan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be on.
It's really nice to meet you. we want to talk about how we came to know of you. Some people probably already know you, but you came to our radar more recently because of the congressional hearing or testimony you recently gave. But first, tell us, Dylan, tell us a little bit about you and how you first came to the Federation? And I understand you are still a member, but you also worked on staff at one point.
Yeah, that's right. So backing up a little bit, I was born and raised in Maine, way up north. I was blind all my life, or with Usher syndrome, and I didn't really have any exposure to the NFB or to blind people generally. It was just kind of me out there doing my thing growing up for the most part. But when I graduated from undergraduate university in Maine and then went to grad school in Boston, I got connected with the powerhouse that is Amy Rule, who is the president of the NFB of Massachusetts, as many of you probably know. And it was then that I really got involved. And, my life has really changed since then. I was involved very much in the local chapter there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the rest is history as far as my time with the NFB. Although from there, I did end up having the privilege of being hired on as a government affairs specialist at the national headquarters of NFB, which is where I got my start in my career as a lobbyist and policy advocate.
Yeah. So what year was that when you first came on staff?
That would have been 2017.
Okay.
Right after I graduated from grad school.
And you are now Director of Foreign Affairs at POGO, which again stands for?
Yep, Project on Government Oversight, POGO.
So tell us a little bit about POGO.
Sure. So POGO is an independent, nonpartisan watchdog group. We exist to promote more accountability, transparency, and effectiveness in the federal government. We work with both parties across all ends of the ideological and political and partisan spectrum, and we try to make sure that the federal government is worthy of the American people by being responsive and responsible. We try to fight back against things like corruption and abuse of power when it comes to the federal government, which, as you and your listeners can imagine, means we are always busy at a full-time level all the time. No matter who's in office, no matter who's in charge, we have a lot to do. How
does it work out that you get a call to testify? Somebody says, hey, we need a specialist on this or an expert on this. How does that go down?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I've had the privilege of testifying quite a number of times before Congress now. This most recent one was not my first one, but what it really requires is that you've built up a bit of a profile and a portfolio as an expertise on a particular issue, and then you work with people in Congress over a number of years to sort of demonstrate and establish that expertise and that background, and you build those relationships so that people on a given committee in Congress or in a given congressional office will trust you, and then if a hearing happened to come up that they're going to be a part of, they will reach out to you to see if you are interested in coming and participating as an expert witness.
You were called in to testify regarding what, and then go into what your major point was in testifying.
Sure. So I'm sure you and your listeners have heard of the DOGE project that Elon Musk is spearheading under the Trump administration. And Congress actually established a DOGE subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And so we at POGO have been working on issues around things like improper payments and waste, fraud, and abuse when it comes to the allocation and the spending of taxpayer dollars. We've been working on that for decades. And so, this newly created DOGE subcommittee was going to be holding a hearing on improper payments and trying to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. So the Democrats on the committee, they chose to reach out to us and to me to come in and testify to basically talk about the real ways to go about trying to solve issues like improper payments, like waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, as opposed to some of what we've been seeing happen under the DOGE project.
And I remember hearing one part of your testimony where you were explaining what abuse really is. Tell us about that.
Yes. So waste, fraud, and abuse are all kind of different things, and they all happen for different reasons. And improper payments are sort of a subset of waste, fraud, and abuse. And even improper payments can happen for a variety of reasons. But the picture you often hear painted by people is that all of this happens as a result of basically evildoers trying to game the system and trying to rip people off and trying to exploit various programs. So, for example, we in the blind community have a lot of people who for perfectly legitimate reasons use things like SSDI or SSI, right? But a lot of people claim that there's a lot of waste and fraud and abuse in those programs, and that people, even some people in the Federation, may be accessing those programs illegitimately and in a kind of a wasteful, fraudulent way. But casting, a wide net in that way and painting with too broad of a brush, I think really loses, the truth of the matter. And that's that this stuff happens for all kinds of reasons, including some, technical reasons of outdated technology and, bad processes, and just like, oversight isn't there all the time. It's not because there are a bunch of bad people doing bad things. And I tried to draw those meaningful distinctions between these things. It's not that we shouldn't still be trying really hard to crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse, and trying to actually, if there are fraudsters and if there are criminals who are using programs in ways that they shouldn't be, we should absolutely be trying to go after them and cracking down on this. But we can't, we can't sweep out, we can't gut these programs entirely, because a lot of people are going to be hurt by that, people who are using these programs in the way that they are intended to be used.
So your points were very clear, but weren't necessarily received favorably by everyone. Tell us a little bit about the unfortunate negative feedback you got.
Yes. But the hearing itself went fine as far as hearings go these days. It wasn't overly substantive. There was a lot of partisan sniping back and forth, but as far as how I was interacted with at the hearing itself, it was fine. There were no issues. But the response online in particular, and on social media even more specifically after the hearing, was pretty atrocious and vitriolic. And all of it had to do with people attacking me on the basis of my blindness, as opposed to attacking the substance of my arguments, which was the most disappointing thing. Right. It's not like I'm naive and I thought that ableism and anti-blindness ideas weren't still out there, and that bigotry doesn't still exist. Of course it does, but I was really hoping that if people were going to have beef with me, it would be about the ideas and the arguments, as opposed to the fact that I happen to be blind. But that wasn't the case.
Is part of that, I've often said to many of my blind friends, do we have to have a different lexicon? Because when we have our chapter meetings and we get together at our state or national convention, hey, it's good to see you again. And of course, we're not seeing each other. It's just the phrase.
Yeah.
And the phrase I think you used was, you don't see any, whatever it was, fraud, misspending, whatever it was. I don't remember the exact quote. And I think it just got so brutal. How could he tell if he can't see a spreadsheet? And again, it's just something. So do you think it's the wording that we have to say it differently, just because that's what's going to, and I don't think in this case, I don't think you're ever going to not draw any fire no matter what you said, but the fact it kind of teed it up for them. Hey, there's a blind guy that says he didn't see anything. Do you think that played a part? And again, I kind of know the answer, I think, already, but do you think that has something to do with?
So this is an interesting thing, because I don't actually think I did use that actual expression. I could have, I actually haven't gone and watched the entire testimony video back to front. I testified, but I don't recall actually using the word "I don't see." That's not what I said, either implicitly or explicitly, that I didn't see waste, fraud, and abuse. I didn't use those words, and I definitely didn't convey that in the thing that I said. Right. So part of the problem is that they were taking my blindness and just like using that as a way to pivot to make these arguments and to put words in my mouth. But yeah, your point stands, David. Like, words are powerful and they do matter, and the words we use are going to have a lot to do with how our ideas and our arguments are received. Sometimes it is important to think about the things we're saying and to try to be a little bit more mindful about swapping in, phrases and idioms and swapping them out depending on the context. But I don't think that was actually a part of this. I think people were just straight up taking me out of context, completely, intentionally in some cases, misinterpreting what I said and then using it as a way to discredit what they thought my argument was, which turned out to not even really be my argument.
And that may be a lot of times when you hear something so many times, you think, oh, that's exactly what was said. And I read there were hundreds of comments along those lines. And maybe that's why I thought that's what you said, because I didn't watch the whole thing, but I did watch the clips. And so maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe everybody just saying, hey, blind guy doesn't see. No kidding.
Yeah.
And that could be the thing.
I'm 95% sure that's true. Again, I would have to go back and watch it end to end to make sure I didn't use that exact wording, but I'm, again, 95% sure I didn't. But I think it's just laziness on the part of
Yeah.
on the part of sighted people being like, oh, haha, blind guy doesn't see,
Yeah.
X, Y, Z. Right.
Dylan, we thought that this would be an excellent time to talk about what it means to be a lobbyist, what it means to be an advocate. And it's great timing because we're just coming off the heels of a show on Washington Seminar. So not everyone is going to have the sort of illustrious career that you've had and, testifying before Congress and, maybe not quite that grand of a level, but there still is something that we can all learn from your experience. First of all, congratulations on being so committed to your career. And just talk about the different ways that people at their community level can be more vocal, more seen, more heard, and then how you have that resiliency to not take things personally, to not get kind of knocked off your stump, but to stay committed to your mission.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Lisa. And you're absolutely right that everybody, kind of no matter what you do as an actual vocation or no matter what you do day in and day out, we all have the the power and the ability to be advocates for, whatever the cause is that we care most about. Now, the NFB is a wonderful place to really develop and hone those skills, because we are organized. We do have a very strong sort of infrastructure around advocacy. And like we have Washington Seminar, and then a lot of state affiliates have their own sort of like a version of Washington Seminar at the state level, which is another really good way to sort of, train in how to do this and to develop the skill set, to take to Washington Seminar or to take kind of in your own activism and advocacy. But the thing I would really encourage everyone to do is just, I think the first thing is to try as much as possible to be engaged and to learn, the issues, to be as informed as you can, because like that is the real sort of currency of advocacy is information and relationships, right? And so you need information to be able to build relationships, and vice versa. They kind of help mutually reinforce each other's. But the thing to do, I think, if we want to be strong advocates in our own sort of personal lives, is to arm ourselves with information and then try to share that information with whoever will listen, but especially with policymakers and decision makers. And I would definitely also encourage us to all try it out at the local level first, because that's often where you can have the most impact.
And I think that's a very good point to emphasize that, because honestly, someone could look at your career, your education, and think, I don't have all of those degrees and I don't have it. But it really does just start at the grassroots level.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are all kinds of ways to get involved at the local level. There are associations at the neighborhood level. There's like town councils, there are like people who are empowered to make decisions that are actually going to be more directly impactful in people's lives on a day in and day out basis. And they all happen to be your neighbors, and they happen to live pretty close to you. And, they do their work in the community oftentimes, and you might run into them in the grocery store or wherever else. So those are the really important, meaningful relationships to build. And if you're trying to advocate or persuade those people, it always helps to know them already, to build up those kind of connections in that network.
Going back to your work at POGO, I was reading that one of the areas of interest, and I chuckle only because it just sort of ironic. So you've been following. Is it a fair description to call it a watchdog sort of organization? Would
Definitely.
that be okay? Yeah. So one of your areas of expertise or things that you've been following is the Pentagon. And, their spending. So first of all, confirm this for me. The Pentagon is one agency that has been notorious for not passing audits. Is that, first of all, correct?
Yep. The Pentagon has failed 7 straight audits. It's the only agency in the federal government that hasn't been able to pass an audit.
All right. So going back to helping to encourage the everyday person, with that kind of track record, how do you, I guess you can speak about your strategy, like how do you keep following this without getting discouraged? And I guess that will be, how other people can be encouraged. So what is your strategy? Like at what point do you give up, or do you just keep on fighting until the fighting is done? What is the exact strategy for something like this where it just has not changed in several years?
It is difficult, to be sure. And one thing that I've had to learn and really develop over my time in doing this work is the ability to compartmentalize, and to remember that change is slow, and it always has been. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? So we have to think about it in those terms, like slow and steady. If you do live and die with each day and you get frustrated that you aren't able to make big sweeping change in a day, a month, a week, a year, you are going to burn out, and it will be too easy to give up. And I mean, I would even point to some of the NFB's core priorities. Like, you think about the things we advocate for at Washington Seminar, oftentimes it's the same issues, and it's been the same issues for years, sometimes even, a lot longer than that. But that's not because we aren't good at what we do and because the issues aren't important. It's because it's really hard to change things, especially policy and law, because all of that has to run through Congress, and Congress is kind of a dysfunctional institution these days and has been trending that way for many years. So it's even harder than it used to be to get things done in Congress. So I don't want to, posit that as a way to discourage people, because it isn't. We still need to, keep fighting the fight. We need to show up every year. We need to show up every, day. And the really important thing to remember too is it's the in-between times, that really matter. So Washington Seminar is an amazing event each year, and that's actually the thing that like radicalized me and turned me into a policy advocate, and I got obsessed with it because of my first experience at Washington Seminar. So I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been, Washington Seminar was critical for me. So I can't speak highly enough of that thing, but that's not how things happen. They happen, the other 360 days a year. There need to be, continuous communication and advocacy and activism happening in between those times. That's what I think NFB is really good at, kind of, all throughout the country, but at the National Center as well. And so that perpetual, constant persistence, has to be a part of how we do things and how you look at making change happen.
Lisa had mentioned earlier, she said something about not taking it personally. This is a very personal thing, though. Again, you were talking about one thing and they turned it on you to be it's because you're blind. How do you not take that personally?
Mostly it's because, and this could be something, I don't want to pretend to speak on behalf of all blind people, but in my experience, there's a lot of ignorance out there, particularly as it pertains to blindness or to other, to any disability really. So I'm just not bothered by that kind of stuff anymore, and it doesn't really like surprise me when it happens. And I'd already to some degree anticipated that something might happen if I testified at this hearing, because it was related to Doge and Elon Musk, and because Elon Musk owns Twitter, and there's this whole, I just knew it was a possibility that something like this could happen. And so, I just went in kind of anticipating that something would happen, and then just told myself that it's just online people doing, the phrase I've been using is it's just like small people with small minds doing small things. And I just don't really, care all that much about what people who I don't ever know and won't ever meet are going to have to say or think about me. And, I think in addition to compartmentalizing, I think you kind of, over the years, I've developed a bit of a, like a thick skin and a sort of a, I just don't care all that much what people think or say about me, aside from my loved ones, of course, and my colleagues and things like that. I'm not a sociopath, but I just like, I don't concern myself all that much with the opinions of strangers. And I definitely don't concern myself with the opinions of strangers on the internet and social media. So I just kind of let it wash all over me and kept it moving.
That is such good advice. And I know this is sort of awkward to toot your own horn, but you've been recognized a couple of times, I believe, as an excellent lobbyist. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. And I don't like to toot my own horn, but I appreciate you.
But toot.
Yeah. I've been recognized by The Hill, which is a big sort of publication in Washington that, as the name implies, is oriented around Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill. And I've been named by The Hill as a top lobbyist in D.C. the past 3 years running. So I'm very proud of that. And my organization, my employer, is very proud of that. And it's just, I think it's a reflection of, my organization's brand and reputation and my ability to kind of work well with people in Congress, across all spectrums and across the aisle, both parties, et cetera, because I really make it a point to do that. We're not a partisan organization, and I try to reflect that and manifest that in the work that I do. And being recognized for that is definitely, it's rewarding and gratifying.
So is that part of what they look at? Is that sort of nonpartisan approach? Like, what qualities does one have to be one of the top lobbyists, according to The Hill, at least?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually know what the criteria are. You have to be nominated by other people,
Okay.
And I have seen on the list some people who are at kind of explicitly partisan organizations. So I wouldn't imagine, nonpartisanship is a prerequisite per se, but I think that's part of like the profile that I bring to the table. So my hope is it was a part of the equation at least.
In your career, you have to do a lot of writing as well, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
So what sort of pieces are you writing these days?
I write op-eds and fact sheets. I write more technical policy analysis pieces. I write testimonies. If I have to testify, you have to write a pretty long written testimony statement kind of thing. And I've written some kind of like content to go on the internet as far as like tweets and things like that. I'd say lots of different kinds of writing actually, which is kind of nice. You get to kind of flex different muscles that way.
Dylan, I just think your trajectory has just been so fascinating. And I'm so glad that you brought it all home to Washington Seminar, because that's what we really wanted to sort of focus on. We wanted the tone of this not to necessarily, be negative in terms of, what happened, although that's incredibly unfortunate and disheartening to a sense. But like I said before, this is an example of how you should be bouncing back and how you stay committed. I mean, you've kind of been one lane. I mean, you've tackled several different subjects, but your main theme is advocacy and just being sort of committed to that has been a remarkable journey to watch. I'm just wondering too, though, when we talk about being active in your community, so this is probably a really silly analogy, but I watched a movie once and it was a fictional movie, but this woman was fighting for her father who had been taken advantage of by this senior center that he was in. And she ended up taking the center to court, but it was really a David and Goliath kind of story. She had, I think, a high school education and they had all of these high-powered lawyers. How does someone with that kind of very minimal minimal experience or exposure, how do you get to the place where you are confident enough, despite who you might be going up against? How do you get to the place where you're confident enough to say, look, I have an issue. I'm right on this issue. I need people to see that I'm right on this issue. Like, how do you just get past this sort of comparison trap of what you don't bring to the table?
I suspect it's a challenge and a struggle for every one of us in our own way, that kind of feeling of imposter syndrome and not feeling good enough. But I come back to, there are some things, especially nowadays and especially with the advent of, technology and, things like the internet, like we all in a lot of ways have an equal playing field when it comes to being able to access information in a lot of ways. I think just being like purposeful and particular about really trying to access the information that is out there to learn what you need to learn in order to, if you are facing an issue, a legal issue or a policy issue, there are always going to be resources that you can access to help you understand what the ins and outs and what the nuances and the details are there. It's not going to be easy, of course. It's a little bit of a, I think every time you tackle a new subject, you have a learning curve, right? But that doesn't mean you can't do it. I think basically enough hard work and enough elbow grease can usually allow you to tackle almost any challenge. There are, of course, for us in our community, there are always barriers that we have to deal with around accessibility and things like that. But again, like there has been a lot of smoothing out of the playing field, leveling out of the playing field in recent years. And I think we have the power to arm ourselves with information and knowledge and expertise and, being able to bring that to bear on challenges we want to fight for in our community or in our own personal lives, I think is, it's easier now than it ever has been.
Of course, we have this great infrastructure within the organization. We have our advocacy team at NFB and, like you mentioned, the Washington Seminar trainings that we have. What other resources would you say people should know they have access to? I'm thinking of one just example off the top of my head is congress.gov, where you can follow a bill. And I think you can sign up for alerts on the activity of a bill. So that might be one thing. Can you think of any other resources that people should sort of arm themselves with? And I guess we would talk about federal, because you wouldn't be able to, talk on the various state levels, but federally speaking, I guess.
Yeah. So Congress.gov is a great one. There are all kinds of really good sort of media outlets that do a really good job of keeping up on the kind of ins and outs and the day in and day out of what's happening in Congress and in the executive branch and federal agencies. So things like, Politico, The Hill, we were talking about The Hill earlier, Roll Call. These are all free to access too, so you don't need a subscription necessarily. So, there are plenty of ways to access the information you need and to keep up with what's going on. It just takes some work for sure, but smartphones are an incredible thing because they allow you to set alerts and push notifications and really help you sort of automatically update on the things you care about and you want to be informed on. You can't go wrong with C-SPAN either. If you want to really watch how the process plays out in real time, it's a really good way to educate yourself on the kind of minutia of congressional procedure and the legislative process, which are really important at the federal level.
Yeah, I've actually been very surprised. Every now and then I'll have my smart speaker play C-SPAN, and I've been surprised at what hearings are going on that I had no idea. Like, wait a minute, how come this isn't being covered? How come I didn't know about this? So C-SPAN is a good one. Thank you for that one. Feel free to add anything else that we did not talk about, but I also wanted to give you the chance to share whatever contact information you're comfortable with sharing, and also where people can maybe read the full testimony, read some of your articles. How can they get access to that?
Sure, yeah. So if you want to see any of the work that I've done while at POGO, you can just type in my name to a search engine of your choice, and then pogo.org, POGO.org, and my staff profile will come up, and under that is all my written works, including the most recent testimony. So that's a pretty easy way to get at it. And if people want to reach out to me, directly, you're welcome to. My email address is my first name, Dylan, Dylan, last two initials, H as in Hulu, G as in golf, 1986 @gmail.com.
Dylan, we're very proud to have had you on. Thank you so much for just being a great example of someone who is just achieving great things and keeping it moving. That's kind of one of my favorite phrases, as David knows. But that's what I think I'm so impressed with, is that you're so committed and not very easily sort of pushed off the ledge. So kudos to you.
Well, I feel privileged to be able to wake up every day and have the job that I have, to fight the fight that I fight, and to try to advance the mission that I do. So I find it, privileged to do what I do. So it's not hard to stay committed as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks again to Dylan for stopping by and talking about his testimony and how he continues to fight on. And Lisa, what a great story it is.
A really great story. And I really hope people got the message that you don't have to be at this top level like he is to be an advocate. You can start in your own community. Many of us have heard the stories of people not, the ride share, not picking them up because they have the guide dogs. Those are the kind of issues that you can really be sort of well versed and well trained in. And that could be your platform.
Just thinking about what Dylan was saying in the interview, I've recently had a little bit of a dust up with someone in a governmental agency, which you'll have to flip over to my own podcast where I'll talk about it in an episode. Again, because we're fighting for something that we believe should be happening, and if it's not happening, you can't stay silent. You just can't stay silent. No one is going to know, and they're going to just dismiss us. So you continue to fight on, like Dylan is doing, and you go from there.
And continue to fight on even if they come for you personally, because that I think is a message that we don't want to miss. Even the other articles that I read in his interview, he said, and he said even during our interview, that he really wasn't surprised. It didn't shock him that he got that kind of negative attack, but it doesn't seem to throw him off. And that's how sort of like thick-skinned and stonewalled we should all be.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear what you think. Give us a call, 267-338-4495. Have you ever been pushed aside and your opinion not meant anything because, oh, well, you're blind. What would you know about X, Y, or Z? 267-338-4495. Let us know. You've got up to 3 minutes. Please leave your name and town. If you do leave a voicemail, give us your opinion on everything that's going on here. And if it's happened to you, or if you've got questions, comments, show ideas, anything you've got, again, give us a buzz.
Yeah, and remember, like David sort of mentioned here, if it's happening to you, it may just well be happening to someone else, or you can help someone else. The other way to reach us is through email. Our email address is whitecanesconnect@gmail.com.
Lisa, it was a fascinating show. We got this together pretty quickly after everything went down, and I was happy that we were able to bring Dylan on.
I agree, and I think it's just a perfect follow-up to our episode of Washington Seminar. So thanks for listening, everyone, and stay strong and be empowered.
Thanks for listening. Take care.